You need to be open to listening, hearing, and being willing to feel guilt. Remembering that it is your radar that tells you right from wrong. It's letting you know, it's your compass. And then you can work from healing from it. Luckily, there's only 3 absolutely horrifying steps that you need to take to get through that. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. It's so great to see so many faces here today. Oh, you guys look amazing. And hello if you're online as well or watching this later. It's been a funny experience leading up to this message because it's like it's been a bit of a roller coaster of emotion. On one hand, I was making props and having super fun with it. And on another hand, I was delving into these depths of horror going on in my own life. One of the moments happened last Sunday, actually. So Pastor Kev did a great job of starting this series off, and it was awesome, and I was writing heaps of notes, and it was really great. And then we did the Slido at the end, and the Slido asked the question, what's the emotion that you struggle with the most? And it had about 7 options. Does anyone remember that Slido? Did you participate in the Slido? Anyone? Hands up, please. I want to see them. Yes, you caused my grief because this Slido showed 3 major top answers, right? They took out like 28 and 30% of the top answers each. And they were, in this order, anger, insecurity, and fear. And then guess what came in 4th? You can take a guess because it's the topic of today. Guilt, at like 5%. And I straight away thought, I was sitting here and I thought, great. No one's feeling guilty. No one cares. You're all going to sit here just slack-jawed, checking out for 20 minutes because only like 5% of you need this message. I actually had a moment where I thought, what am I going to say? I need to change everything. And then I stopped and I thought, well, hang on, what does guilt look like? What are the arms and the legs and the voice of guilt? And because, anger has a voice. Pastor Kev shared last week about how he completely destroyed a whippersnipper, right? That's an act of anger. You can see it, you can hear it. So what does guilt look like? Because guilt is a feeling that we feel in here, but we often don't acknowledge it, we don't express it, and it's very closely linked to something else. And I'm so proud of you guys because it was the biggest word in the Slido this morning, and that's shame. And there's a reason we use the phrase secret shame. Because we don't want to talk about it. It's hard enough to admit it to ourselves that we have a secret shame, let alone then go and talk to someone else about it. Guilt and shame are humiliating, and they sit in a very, very vulnerable place. Pastor Kev can tell his story about the whippersnipper, and it's funny. Very rarely do we talk about a story of shame and end up with everyone having, gales of laughter. But to give you an example of this kind of outworked, I had a ton of them, but I decided on this one. And that is years ago, my husband Sam, so we are pretty big on the love languages in our house. We try to do them. And he said to me one time, I feel like you're not really trying to do my love language. Guilty, absolutely. I suddenly realised in that moment, yes, you're right. I have been prioritising other things over your love language. And I felt that, and I should have said, yep, you're right. I'm so sorry. Instead, what came out of my mouth was, oh, really? Well, maybe if I wasn't doing everything, maybe I'd have time for a hug every now and then. So what I felt as guilt, I expressed as defensiveness, I expressed it as anger, I expressed it as blame, and I justified my position so I didn't have to actually feel guilty, even though I knew I'd done the wrong thing. So sometimes we can live for a really long time feeling guilty, but we don't bring it into the light because it's really hard to face it. It's one of the worst feelings to face, in my opinion. And this is another part of my roller coaster of emotion, was when I was thinking about an example of this, because it was funny because when I first saw I had guilt, my first thought was, oh, I know why they've given me this topic, because I've got this sordid pre-Jesus history. We're going to bring up my testimony and it's going to be all amazing and everyone's going to be like, wow, you did all those bad things and now you're okay. And that's true. I've been pigeonholed slightly into that, and I did think of that. But then this other incident kept like a bubble, it kept coming to the top. It actually hit me the second I realised I was doing guilt, and it kept coming back up. And when it came up, I said, No way. Not touching that one. I'm not sharing that story. And it just kept coming up. No matter how many other great examples I threw at my message, this one kept coming back up. So here it goes. Okay. A long time ago, I'm just going to say first up, this is not like a crazy story where you're going to go, oh my gosh, she killed someone secretly. It's not even like that. It's just that it exposes something so heartless and thoughtless that I did that I am embarrassed to share it. That's what it is. Okay. So this happened about 14 or 15 years ago. I actually don't really remember. We were at I was at a friend's house for dinner. There was a few people there and there was an older couple and it was their place. And we were eating dinner and there was lots of joking and laughing and we were looking at old photos and photos of their childhood and things like that. And one of the photos I ended up with in my hand was of a girl who was about maybe 14. She was wearing, I remember the picture quite vividly, she was wearing like an 80s or very late 70s style foofy sort of communion outfit, if you can imagine it. And there was a lot of conversation going on and I, just said a joke about what she was wearing. I don't remember the particular comment I made, but I made a joke about what she was wearing. And this weird vibe suddenly hit the room and it just kind of got quiet and awkward and there was a little bit of like side eye as everyone kind of looked at each other and someone went, and then the conversation picked back up and everything went back along. But I clocked it that something weird happened. I didn't understand what had happened. Night went on. And then it was like, I reckon it was the next day, it was like my brain had been percolating that instant, like trying to figure out what happened. And it just, all the pieces kind of fell together and it hit me like I'd swallowed a brick. I realised what had happened in that moment. And what I had missed and not put together was that photo was of that older gentleman's sister who had passed away at a very young age. And he had actually said that just before I made my comment, but I didn't put together that that was the sister he was talking about. And it was like a hot wave went over me when I realised what I had done. That's like if my mum passed away and someone made a joke about her haircut. Like it was a horrible, heartless thing to say. And I felt so guilty and I felt so ashamed of what I had done. But I also immediately said to myself, don't worry about it. No one would have noticed. I'm sure, even though I knew that they had. But I didn't want to face that. I wanted to stop feeling guilty. So I just said, don't worry, no one will have noticed. It's fine. Just forget about it. They've probably forgotten about it, even if they did notice. Don't worry. The problem was, and I know that God knew I was sorry. He knew that I had not meant that in that way. I would never, ever, 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 ever say something like that on purpose. Problem was that probably once or twice a month, that incident would just suddenly, someone used the word flashback, I'd have a flashback, and it was a hot flashback. It would just come over me again. I'd be driving, I'd be doing the groceries, I'd be hanging out the washing, and it would just hit me again. And I'd be like, don't worry, it's been too long, no one remembers. 5 or 6 years later, I was driving here to church. It was when we must have had like the night experiences on, and maybe I was playing because I was here quite early, and driving here, I felt such an intense weight of conviction over this thing that I had been carrying for 6 years. I knew that was the night I had to make it right. I had to do something about it. So I got here, I brought my stuff in, I went back out to the car park, and with very, very shaking fingers, I called this gentleman and I said, hey, this is weird, I know, but years and years and years ago, I was at your house and we were having dinner and we were looking at old photos. And there was absolutely no condemnation in his voice, but when he said, yes, I remember, I knew straight away that what I had said had deeply hurt him. I could hear it in his voice. He remembered, he knew, and 6 years later, he still remembered it and he still felt it. And that was like another dagger through my heart. Like I remember standing out there and just, I wanted the ground to swallow me up. But I apologised and I explained it, and then he said, it's okay, Pauline, thank you so much for calling. It's all okay, thank you. I really appreciate that you cleared that up. And then the night went on. And I'm telling you that story because it shows that it doesn't always have to be something massive that we do that we carry around in a weight inside us. It doesn't have to be something huge that makes us feel guilty. And no matter how big or small the crime, if we want to put it that way, it leaks out, it shows up in your life, because what's in the heart, what's inside you, is what comes out of the mouth. That's what Pastor Kev's message was last week. And we feel guilt physically I was amazed by the responses that came up on the Slido because you guys nailed a lot of these. You'll feel it as a weight, a burden, a niggling feeling in your stomach, a hot flush like I did. You'll express it as anger, defensiveness, depression, anxiety, someone had that one up there, restlessness, insomnia, muscle tension, an upset stomach, spiraling thoughts, headaches. It's the physical manifestation of guilt. That's what it looks like if we were to give it arms and legs. So the feeling of guilt is really there to just let you know that you did something that requires correction. If we just kind of look at it very unemotionally, that's what it is. We call it a guilty conscience. And if you don't clear it, like I didn't, it'll sit in you using whatever voice it needs to use until you listen. That's why Proverbs 4:23 says, you've heard this one before, above all else, guard your heart. Now, guard your heart does not mean lock it away. It means watch over it, think about it, clear stuff out of it, check in with yourself, see what's going on the inside. For everything you do flows from it. So it's your words, your actions, the physical self, everything comes from what is going on in here. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples. I know it's easy to think of all the big things. I gave you one big example of a small thing, but let's have a look at some other ones. We can say, oh yeah, like I'm good, I've never murdered anyone, I never cheated on my spouse, I'm not living a double life with a secret of lies with a married man. That's my old testimony that I'm not getting into today. That's for another time. It's easy to say, no, I'm good. But what about addictions like alcoholism, binge eating? Where's Megs? Megs with the M&Ms, but that's such a classic example. What about smoking, especially if it's something like that you say you've quit, but you haven't actually? That's a classic secret shame. What about the small everyday stuff like yelling at your kids, losing your temper, lying about something, not paying attention to your spouse or taking someone for granted, not doing a job you said you'd done, ignoring someone deliberately because they're inconvenient to you, not helping someone out when you know you could have, stealing something from work, saying something mean about someone behind their back that you now regret, and the classic, hurting someone's feelings. And surely that's got to be number one, is this dumb stuff we do that impacts and hurts other people. And some of us have done those really big things. I'm fully aware of that. Some of us do all those little things every single day. Some of you did those things in your pre-Jesus days, and maybe you're still carrying the guilt of that. But all these little actions, they come from lots of different motivations. It could just be an accident, like my example was. It could be something that you did as a knee-jerk reaction to someone hurting you. You might have been angry and done something. Whatever the motivation, it actually doesn't even really matter. But guilt does not mean that you're a bad person. It just means you did something that wasn't modeled to us by Jesus to create a good life here on earth. So, are you ready to get to the fun stuff? Okay, how do we deal with guilt? There's really only two paths. This is where my props come in. Okay, I'm going to give you a weird example from The Block. Does anyone watch The Block? Shit, who's my blockheads? Yes, I see you. I see you all. Don't give me any spoilers. I'm so far behind. I'm still only on Kitchen Week. Okay, so on The Block, it's just a renovation show. There's two contestants that I want to point out. I don't remember their names. Seriously, all the girls this season look identical. I can't tell. They're all just blonde. So there's two people. The first one we're going to call Extrovert Girl. Okay? She's just like happy. Oh, and then I'll introduce my two characters actually. And then we've got Victim Girl. So we've got Extrovert Girl and Victim Girl. I didn't know what a victim face was. She just looks generally annoyed. Okay. Victim Girl got a text message from another contestant and it said, hey, you said a joke the other night. You were hiding an insult inside that joke. That is something that you do and it hurt my feelings. Ooh, guilty. She absolutely did. I saw it. And then there's Victim Girl. I saw it because it's on TV. Victim Girl also got a text message. She got a text message from her builder at 3:30 a.m. on Monday morning, the day after judging happened on their room for that week. And the builder said, hey, it's really disrespectful that you didn't text us on Sunday to let us know how our room went, because our builders, we work so hard, we don't see our families, we do everything to create this room for you and you couldn't even text us. That's really selfish. Guilty, absolutely guilty. So let's look at the two ways that these girls handled the guilt that they felt in that moment. Extrovert Girl cried for 24 hours. She lost it. She was so upset. She went super introspective. She started going, is that what I do? Man, I would never have meant to do that. Oh, how can I change this? She called her mum, do I do this? She really went through the wall with that one. And she did it, by the way, on national TV. She didn't hide from it. And then we have victim girl. Victim girl sent a text message back to her builder. And it said, "It is so disrespectful that you messaged me at 3:30 in the morning. I'm tired. And by the way, our Sundays are really busy, so you don't understand. I don't have time to send a text message. Oh, and by the way, I'm just responding to your horrible tone because your tone was disrespectful." Right? She blamed, she justified, she got defensive. She absolutely did not want to deal with the fact that she had done the wrong thing she had been accused of. These are the only two ways to deal with guilt. You can either feel it and go through it and come out like this on the other side, free, and the weight is lifted, or you can be like this person who is going to continue doing this for the rest of her life because she will never face it, she will keep justifying, she will keep blaming, and she will stay trapped in that same pattern forever and ever. That's our only two options. And neither of them are easy, but one is easier because it ends at least with a smile at the end of it, okay? So they're your two options. So you need to learn to be, or you need to be open to listening, hearing, and being willing to feel guilt. Remembering that it is your radar that tells you right from wrong. It's letting you know, it's your compass. And then you can work from healing from it. Luckily, there's only 3 absolutely horrifying steps that you need to take to get through that. Who's ready for number 1? Bring it. Okay, so the first one is, it's actually, funnily enough, the easiest, and yet it's also the hardest, because you have to understand one thing and understand it super, super, super completely all the way through, that God forgives everything. So your number 1 step is forgiveness from God. Funnily enough, he's the one we hide from the most, despite the fact that he sees everything. All right. I love true crime. We're doing a bit of a sidestep here, by the way. Follow me. I love true crime. I'm a crime junkie. And I've learnt a bit about a guy named Jeffrey Dahmer. Does everyone know Jeffrey Dahmer? Oh, some of you do. Okay, Jeffrey Dahmer was a prolific serial killer in the 1980s in America. He killed 17 young men, and he was a cannibal. So what he did was like unbelievably horrific. He was caught and confessed in 1991. He was sentenced to life in prison. While he was in prison, a pastor named Pastor Roy Ratcliffe from the local Church of Christ was visiting him. And it's a bit of a long story, but the very short story is that Jeffrey Dahmer dedicated his life to Jesus while in prison. He was baptized there, and Pastor Roy visited him every single week until Jeffrey Dahmer was murdered by one of the other inmates while he was there. The interesting thing about that is people's responses to that. So some people said, there is no way that someone could do things as horrific as that and be changed. No way. No one can come back from that. And then there were other people who, there was a lot of backlash against the pastor. People said, that man didn't deserve to have you go and talk to him about Jesus. How dare you do that for that man? And then there were the people, Christ-following people, who actually said, if Jeffrey Dahmer is going... Dahmer? What's his name? Dahmer. If Jeffrey Dahmer is going to heaven, I don't want to be there. And this is something Pastor Roy said about that. This is a quote from him. He said, how can a Christian hold that viewpoint? I don't understand it. Does it come from a misunderstanding of the forgiveness of sin? Is forgiveness limited to those who are not very bad after all? Is there no joy in knowing that a sinner has turned to God? So we know that what Jeffrey Dahmer did was, in our earthly terms, absolutely horrifically unforgivable. The devastation that he brought onto those 17 families, the way that it changed the landscape of America, what he did was unreal and horrifying. We can't even imagine it. But it was forgivable by God. There is no needle, there's no gauge where it goes from this is easily forgivable, it's in the green, don't worry about that, that's an easy one. Oh, this is a bit amber, watch out, you're getting into the territory where you're going to have to do some penance for that one. Oh, red, yeah, we call that condemnation red because you can't come back from it. There is none of that. That's what we do as people. God has none of that. No matter how we perceive it on earth, it is all the same for him. The feeling of guilt that Jeffrey Dahmer felt might have been the same guilt that you felt because you yelled at your kids this morning. It's all the same. Guilt is guilt. Forgiveness is forgiveness. God doesn't see it any differently. Are we getting some perspective? So what about the man who made it his mission to capture and imprison all of the people who follow Jesus across the whole world? That was his mission. He gave the nod and he watched while people murdered Stephen, who was one of Jesus' most outgoing followers. He imprisoned countless Christians who were tortured, who were fed to lions for sport, who were set on fire, who were left in prison to die. Acts 9:21 says this man was the one who caused such devastation among Jesus' followers. It says he was uttering threats with every breath and was eager to kill Jesus' people. That's a lot more than just 17 families. And who am I talking about? Who am I? Paul, thank you. Paul, who was called Saul of Tarsus. He was a man who knew God. He was actually studying to be a rabbi, but he absolutely believed Jesus was a fraud and a liar. And it was his job, and it was one he actually truly seemed to relish, to clean up all these people who followed the way, to get rid of them all. And then Jesus met him on the road to Damascus. Saul became Paul, and he was a changed and forgiven man. And that man went on to write most of the letters and the documents that make up the New Testament, the Jesus part of the Bible that we have today. He was a church planter. He traveled the world speaking about Jesus, and he often shared his story of unforgivable forgiveness. He was changed by forgiveness. So Romans 3:22-24 says this righteousness, which means rightness with God, forgiveness, is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile, so no difference between people groups. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's a whole lot of alls and not very many sums, and not very many sometimeses, and not very many, if you do a few things. It's just always, all for everyone, all the time. So do you think God can also forgive that you ate a packet of M&Ms? Do you think he can forgive that maybe you lied or you hurt somebody, that you cheated on your spouse? If we take away the gauge of sin and we just say everything is guilt and everything can be forgiven, there's nothing that you can't go to him with every single minute of every single day, and he takes it away. And here's the catch. All you have to do is talk to God about it. It's honestly that easy. And I think the problem with us is that we punish ourselves, we get in our own way, which is what Pastor Kev was talking about this morning. We punish ourselves for it, and we actually can't even comprehend that forgiveness and grace and mercy and freedom from that guilt can be given so freely and so easily and without condemnation and without even judgment. God doesn't even judge because he gets it. When you look into Jeffrey Dahmer's history, into his childhood, you go, yep, hurt people. God knows all of it. He gives it freely and without condemnation. Okay, number 2. Next thing you've got to do, not so easy, is forgiveness from others. So here's something that I made up for you that, you can memorize this, tuck it in your back pocket, get it out whenever you need it. It's a little saying. It goes like this. You can't just ask for forgiveness for yourself and leave a trail of wounded, bleeding people behind you. It's good, isn't it? It's catchy. You should be able to remember that whenever you want it. You put on a t-shirt, someone said. Okay, so God forgives, absolutely, but he also asks us to love people. So it's not enough that we go to God and we say, yay, I'm all free from my guilt, but meanwhile there's people behind you that are still hurting from your actions. So we have to make it right. It's part of making life better for us and for other people. And I would guess that most of the time our guilt comes from something we've done that hurt someone else. And even if you've gone to God for forgiveness, he may just keep reminding you all the time that you need to make it right, the same way that he did for me. That act of forgiveness wasn't complete for me until I had gone and made it right with that other person. So you got to make that phone call. You got to do what you're being prompted to do. And I'm going to turn around and say that if someone comes to you and asks for your forgiveness for something that they've done to you, our job is actually to learn to give that forgiveness freely. Colossians 3:13, the Message version says it so well. It says, forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. That's it. Forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. Guess who wrote that? Paul. It was Paul. He understood the assignment. Grudges are just another kind of weight to carry. All right, the last one is number 3, forgiveness from yourself. So you've gone to God for forgiveness, you've taken the hard step and you've made it right, and just remembering that you may go to someone and say you're sorry, and they might go, well, get stuffed, I don't care, I still hate you. That's not your problem. You've done what you can. Their grudge is now there for them to work through. Don't let that go, but you can't beat yourself up for those mistakes. You've got to learn to let it go. You've got to learn to get out of the way, to make sure that you're not creeping back into that feeling of guilt all the time. You've got to make sure that you understand. God forgave, it's done, you've made it right, and now you just got to be okay with it. And you'll always feel what you did. I still feel so gross when I think about that thing that... Hallelujah. Oh, you just muted me. Oh, I see. The message is that bad. Sam was one of the people who didn't care about guilt this week. Okay. So you'll always feel what you did. I still feel very emotional about what I did all those years ago, but I no longer feel guilty about it. I don't carry that same sense of shame around it. I just feel bad. And Paul talks about the wrong things that he did, but he always talks about it from a state of forgiveness. It's part of his story. And when we go through this journey, when we go from being someone who is this to this and back to this, it becomes part of your story. It's your testimony that you can tell. You're a changed person. And I bet through that process, you've learned and you've grown. You've done something new that you hadn't done before. You've reached into a place in yourself that was really difficult. It was hard. It was hidden, but you did it anyway. And you're back to this. You're breathing easily because grace feels amazing. It feels like light. It feels like the burden is gone. That's what we want. We want to travel through this over and over again. And God gives us all the tools to do that. You face the worst parts of yourself and you walked through the wall. You were guilty. You were never condemned. There is no condemnation read. So don't condemn yourself, because that's not why God sent Jesus Christ. He put a plan in place so you would never have to carry the feeling of guilt for any more longer than you wanted to. It's up to you, really, how long you want to carry it for. So what if we all started facing that guilty feeling, that little knock on the door that tells you that, hang on, this isn't feeling right, you need to do something about this, rather than hiding from it or justifying it or ignoring it? How much less weight would we carry every day? How differently would you operate as a person? How different would you operate spiritually? I mean, Pastor Kev was talking about that this morning. Maybe you're spiritually sitting because actually you're kind of carrying a whole lot of guilt about stuff and you don't feel like you can stand up and worship. You don't feel like you can pray because you feel like there's a big barrier between you and God. That barrier is you. That's just how it goes. And I know I was that for a long time too. God gave us a way to release the guilt that makes us lash out or hide and be controlled by our emotions. He gave us a way to be free. Guilt doesn't need to be the boss of you because God already went full boss mode on guilt when he sent Jesus Christ to earth to die on the cross for us. He already took care of it. Guilt is only there to let you know that you need to do something because something isn't right. And if you don't even know what it is, ask God, he'll show it to you. He's really good at that. So you make it right by taking it to God, by making it right with others and getting out of the way, letting it go. And forgiving yourself for being human. You know, God knew we would do this dumb stuff. That's why he sent Jesus. He already took care of it. And I've asked the team this morning to play the song. What's it called, Keely? Death Was Arrested. This song, a few years ago, we played the song and I was sitting over there and I just lost my marbles. I was crying my face off because this song really tells the story of, it's kind of about giving your life to Jesus and the change that happens. But if we think of death as whatever it is that takes life away from you, it's also talking about the journey of moving through things like guilt and sin that weigh us down. And that when we take that to God and we talk to him and we make it right, it's lifted. And the lyrics to this song, I cry every time it gets to that line that says, my orphaned heart was given a name. I just can't. I can't hold it together because, Paul is the perfect example of that. Saul went around doing horrible things, and when Jesus came to him, he was given a new name. He was given the name Paul. And when we say yes to Jesus, we are given a new name, even if our earthly name stays the same. And that gives us the ability to go to God with any of this stuff. I know I didn't even talk about the love of God. Jesus' love is like a huge bear hug. And sometimes we think when we go to Jesus and we have to say that we did something wrong, I don't know what we're expecting, but all we're going to get is a really big bear hug. And this song just talks about how that is so freely available to us, even when we don't always comprehend it because we beat ourselves up so much. But God's the one you never have to worry about. He did everything to make sure that you never had to feel 1 second of guilt, that you could make it right, and then you could live free, and then you could tell other people. And honestly, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you don't know anything about what I'm saying or Jesus, please come and talk to me afterwards. Feelings like guilt don't have to be the boss of us because our boss already took care of it. So while we're singing this song, and I'd really actually love it, I know we don't normally do this, but I'm going to ask you all to stand up while we sing this song because it is such a declaration, and I think that, do it now. Let's do it. While I pray. Let's all be standing while I pray. It's such a declaration of what Jesus did, and I would love it if we could walk away from today with just that feeling of hope that anything you've done can be removed from you. So I'm going to pray. It's going to be real short because I don't think that we need long prayers for stuff like this. And then let's sing together. God, we are so grateful that you put an incredible plan in place that gave us the bridge to be able to come to you no matter where we're at and just talk to you. And it is so easy. And this morning, God, as we're singing this song and spending these last few minutes together, and even during the week, I really pray that you would open up things that we've been hiding from and help us to face it and move through it. We just want freedom, God. We want your grace and your glory to shine through us, and we need to make space for that, and that means getting rid of all the junk and the debris. And that's what we ask for this morning, God, an absolute ceiling to be lifted off people's lives, to be lifted off this room. God, that you would take up the room, that you would take up the space that we're now going to leave because we're getting rid of the stuff that we're carrying. Thank you for everything. In Jesus' name, amen.